Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
The motto of this show is everything you know is wrong. But does that include everything we know about North American history? Why did Christopher Columbus really go to the Caribbean? And here in Rhode Island,
to the other side.
Who really did he get to the other side? Very funny, Ben. And here in Rhode Island, who really built the Newport Tower and why?
Hey there, and welcome to the 473rd edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those intriguing questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. Alright, so this evening we'll be discussing a subject dear to our hearts, the question about history and the endless things we don't know about it. And we do invite your calls and comments, and the numbers tonight are 401-766-1240 locally and 800-449-1240 from anywhere in the U.S. or Canada.
Arthur Faram was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and moved with his parents at the age of 13 to California. After high school, he joined the U.S. Marine Corps, serving for 9 years and receiving the Purple Heart Medal after being wounded in Vietnam. He later worked as a computer analyst and certified cartographer. It's a map maker, for those who don't know. After retiring, Arthur finished college and attended law school to prepare himself for starting his own business. He has, however, found time to research the stories of certain ancient information that has greatly influenced history and has been passed down through it, sometimes by means of his own family. Excuse me. Arthur is the author of the book Ancient Signposts and his latest, L'America. And he is the great Graham Hancock's author of the month for September. And this is what drew our attention to him, because we have a lot of respect for Graham, and as he's been on the show. So.
Well, yeah, Graham Hancock is probably the greatest scholar there is on alternative human prehistory.
Sure.
So Arthur's websites include www.newporttower.com and www.thekensingtonstone or the
Kensington Runestone.
The Kensington Runestone. Sorry, I took out rune there. .com. And Arthur Faram, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to speak with you.
Oh, well, you are most welcome. So I know this is a very broad question, but we like to start from broad and try to hone down the answers. But can you give us a quick overview of your work on North American history, and what are your conclusions?
Well, I started my whole book, both Ancient Signposts and L'America, are based on an ancient science called geoglyphology. And the furthest I've traced it back so far is 24,000 BC that they were using this. And I've traced it all the way up to the 1800s before they quit using it. And what this geoglyphology, I need to tell you this, because if I don't, the rest of the broadcast will mean nothing to the listeners.
Well, we don't want that, so go ahead.
I need to tell them about the science before we get started with the show.
Sure.
Geoglyphology is nothing more than writings on the earth that describe territories of civilizations that lived during the time that they wrote the geoglyphs. And if you think about it, if you can find these geoglyphs, you can find out a lot about the people that put them down there at the time that they put them there. A geoglyph can be a building with unparalleled sides that point to different places. It can be a monument that has sides that point to important places or borders on a country. Later on, and around 1500, they started just placing rocks on the ground or digging trenches are less complicated ways of making these geoglyphs. And all you have to do is take and get a bearing on the lines that comprise these geoglyphs and follow them using the protocols that these people have developed. And they, most of the time, lead to a boundary or a place that these people have traveled or where they were born or somewhere. And if you cross oceans, which all these things do, then you know that a long time ago people were traveling the ocean. In fact, they were traveling the ocean during the whole period from 24,000 years ago till now. And what else? That's pretty much it right now.
Okay. Ben, can I get a question in here? I know you got...
No. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, Arthur, a lot of people may be hearing this and saying, well, geez, 24,000 years, that's a long time. But this resonates with me because we've often said this on the show, too. You have at least a million years of what we call prehistory that is just empty time. And there really is no such thing as empty time. I mean, people do things. There could have been 1,000 civilizations rising and falling in those times. So, 24,000 is nothing.
Exactly. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this does resonate with me. I think people need to take it seriously. I think that standard archaeology, which is now sort of, well, there are a number of things that I think it's doing to sort of expand its horizons, needs to pay attention to things like this. So, well, I'm sorry. So that's just a comment. Go ahead.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Mainstream archaeologists at this particular time have reputations to protect, and in doing so, they're doing themselves and civilization a disservice, because the people that are discovering all the great discoveries right now are non-archaeologists.
Well, that's true. Well, as you know, science is very political, and it's very unfortunate. So it's often not the science that's a problem, but the scientists.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't want to monopolize the monologue here. So go ahead and so what are your essential conclusions about what those geoglyphs tell us? Other than global trade and a very early period, which is really becoming obvious. Things of that kind.
Right. With our modern tools, we're beginning to discover these things and starting to understand them. And I didn't come across this geoglyphology until about 5 years ago. And since I started using it and using it to trace civilizations, I've traced the use of this science all over the world. So it's starting to prove Plato's sayings in his writings in Critias, that at one time the world was divided up into sections, and just like we have countries now.
Yeah.
And somebody was put in charge of each one, and this appears to be during the golden age of civilization, which was right after the Ice Age.
Well, there are a lot of arguments by historians that most of the stuff that Plato said was symbolism. Like, he was really, really big into, like, stories and such, and using symbols for, literary effect, I guess.
Exactly.
So how would you respond to people who say, well, that's not really true, he's not meant to be taken literally?
Well, one thing that was, I'm sure you're aware of Troy, that he talked about, that the archaeologist said was a myth.
Sure. That
has been found.
Mm-hmm.
And geoglyphology is starting to prove out his talkings about the world having been divided up into sections, and that's what I'm finding with these geoglyphs.
Can you tell us more about the sections into which the world was divided? What the civilizations were like?
Well,
can I just one preface to that? I'll give you the reason why. One of the reasons I asked that question, and there are a lot of people who we have on the show who think this is interesting. I believe, and a number of other people do, and perhaps you do, that we've gone from, as it were, stone tools to power tools several times, maybe 4 times, maybe more, in the course of this long unknown history. And
I would not disagree with that.
Yeah, and either a war or a natural disaster or some other thing knocked us back to the Stone Age, because over all that time. So go ahead and take it from there about what you found as far as what kind of civilizations these were.
Okay, well, you originally wanted to talk about Newport, since that's where you're
at.
Oh,
yes, of course. Yeah, oh, no, we're going to... It's our local area here.
Yeah, and I have a lot of information on Newport.
Sure.
Newport appears to be the center of civilization in North America since...
Well, they'd agree with that.
At least 5,000 BC. There are at least 7 geoglyphs that I have found that point to Newport Island. One is in Africa, one in Greenland, one in China, two in the United States, one in Mexico, and one in South America. So, this is pretty widespread group of geoglyphs pointing to the same spot 5,000 years ago. So it would seem that Newport at that time was some pretty important place.
Well, what would you say to those who might say, well, you're reading into this, that there have to be a certain number of angles in a square, and the geoglyph might be just coincidence. So how would you respond to that?
Exactly, and I have had people say that, and I've had them test it, and I've had them just draw a line anywhere on the Earth and see if it meets any of the protocols that have been established by these people that I had to learn before that I could do it. Mm-hmm. And none of them have met the protocols that are required to tell where one of these lines ends at.
All right, so could you tell us more about... This doesn't have anything to do with ley lines as such. These are just geographical lines.
Every interview that I've had, they ask that question.
Yeah.
And the answer is no. It has nothing to do with the ley lines.
Yeah, just clearing that up, yeah.
Ley lines are a magnetic pattern of anomalies in the magnetic field of the Earth. Mm-hmm. And I have not studied ley lines. I have no opinion one way or the other.
Well, neither really have we to any great degree. I associate it pretty much with the telluric current myself.
I really just don't know much about it in general. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, geoglyphology is physical. I have over 1,000 satellite pictures of geoglyphs all over the world, mm-hmm. and most of them I have plotted out to their destinations, and they all make sense. And so there's no doubt in my mind. I could prove, if I could sit down and talk to someone, I could prove within 30 minutes that make him a believer.
So lines must lead to the Newport Tower if Newport was so important.
Well, there are 7 that I know of, and I'm sure there's many more. That's just the ones I've found. Many of these, the way that I find these geoglyphs is that many of them point to another geoglyph, and that's one of the protocols that they used. If you can follow the line out and find another geoglyph, there's a reason for that, and that's why I have such a wide array of samples, is because many of these geoglyphs point to another one, and I just go to that one and plot it out, and then find them 1 more or 2 more, and it goes all over the world. And some of them, like for instance, I'm going to Bosnia in 2 weeks to speak about the Bosnian pyramid in Bosnia. I don't know if you've heard about that yet or not.
No.
Okay. Well, there's a pyramid in Bosnia that was discovered about 5 years ago that is bigger than the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Really? And, of course, archaeologists have done everything that they can to say that it's a fake. Mm-hmm. But none of them have gone there and done scientific studies on it. They just kind of walk over the land because the pyramid was made out of a mountain. It was carved. But what pyramids do is when they're carved or they're built like the Giza pyramids, the edges of the pyramid point somewhere. And the scientists have not been willing to, except for the doctor that found the pyramid and his cohorts, the mainstream scientists have not been willing to go there and do the studies needed to either prove or disprove that the pyramid is real. But I guarantee you, having used geoglyph, that the pyramid is real. And not only that, one of the main points in my presentation will show that the boundary between Europe and Russia was established before 9,500 BC.
So who carved this pyramid?
The Celts.
The Celts, okay. They did get around. And they probably did carry on global trade. I mean, I've seen evidence of that convinces me, and I'm not easily convinced.
Well, the Celts, modern historians will agree that the Celts at one time covered the entire continent of Europe.
Hmm.
And they suppose, they haven't figured it out yet, but they suppose that they came from somewhere around Russia. Well, this is going to prove all that.
Okay.
Because the pyramid, there's 3 pyramids in Bosnia that are right together that form a triangle, that if you apply the geographical criteria to it, perfectly outline the boundaries of the current Europe. And if you go over to Moscow, there's on these older geoglyphs, there's always one radial that points to the geoglyph of the boundary next to it, and there's a 040 degree radial on the Bosnian pyramid that points to Moscow.
Okay.
So I went over to Moscow, and sure enough, the streets of Moscow are laid out in a geoglyph. It looks like circles, but it's a series of straight lines. And I plotted that out, and it is a perfect creation of the boundary of the current Russia.
Wow, that's interesting. The Celts, for those who don't know, are generally associated in the mainline scientific mind as being associated with the British Isles, general vicinity of what's now France. But there is a lot of evidence, as Arthur says, that they really got around.
Oh, they did, and they were run out of Eastern Europe, and as they moved west into the British Isles and Denmark and Portugal and Galicia, many of them moved also to North America, and they would be the people that we used to call Indians.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially a lot of the eastern tribes have very European features.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's who they are. They're the people that were run out of Europe, and eventually the Celts, and eventually the Celts most of them all moved to North America.
Interesting. Well, I mean, there was evidence actually that I'm trying to remember where it was. I want to say it was in Peru. There was a bunch of archaeologists found I want to say it was Peru. I'm thinking Peru. They found these Egyptian pots, and they had no clue how they got there. So they were thinking that there was evidence of some global economy at some point.
Yeah.
I was like, they'd have to sail a very long way to just trade pots.
When the guy can row across the Atlantic Ocean, I mean,
that is true.
Well,
yeah.
There has been global trade for millennia, and the Americas, both North and South America, were kept secret because the Portuguese and the Celts were coming over here and getting the minerals and the wood and whatever else they needed and going back to Europe and selling it and getting rich. And that's probably one of the reasons they told everybody the world was flat. But the Greeks knew
sense.
it wasn't. Well, the Greeks were Celtic anyway, so.
So why change history?
Why change history?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, why don't we know this stuff now? I mean, our ancestors probably knew, heard all these stories of people crossing the ocean and such.
Well, that's in my book, L'America, and for you people listening, that's L.A. space America, which is Portuguese for the Western Star, and America came from the Portuguese term to America. Means to, America means the Western Star, so America came from the Portuguese word of to America.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But what was your question? I think I got off track here.
Oh, I said, essentially, why change history?
Why change history?
Yeah, well, why isn't this taught in our schools?
Well, this is a long story, and we don't have time.
No, we probably don't have time.
We can have you back.
It is in my book, L'America, if you choose to look at it it's on Amazon.
Yeah, we'll give you a chance to...
and I'm not saying that to sell my book, but it is a long story, and it would take me probably an hour to tell you.
Well, it's you were kind enough to send us one, and we unfortunately did not receive it in time to read it. But I'm going to.
We'll probably get it in the near future.
Oh,
of course, after the show.
Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah. You got it though.
We did. Thank you. Yeah, and I intend to read it. It looks really. Matter of fact, I took it on vacation, but we were so busy with a family reunion, I didn't have a chance. The Enos get together, anything can happen. But in any case, I'm thinking of places like Göbekli Tepe, which was in the news, And I went back, I may be wrong, we haven't had Linda Moulton Howe on about this yet, but I believe almost 10,000-year-old city.
I am glad you talked about that.
Yeah, so please go ahead and mention it. That was well accepted by everybody, and everybody's scratching their heads in the archaeological community.
Why would they accept that, but not the Bosnian Pyramid? I don't know.
I don't know.
Anyway, well, maybe because mainstream scientists are working on it. That's probably why.
Perhaps.
But anyway, and they will on the Bosnian Pyramid as soon as it gets so uncomfortable that they can't stay away from it.
Well, now, I don't mean to denigrate science. I mean, as I say, I think scientists very often are the problem because of the politics, et cetera, and the money and all this business. But there seems, I mean, and there are certain reasons why they need proof for things, proof at least in their book. You know, documents or some other corroborative evidence, that sort of thing. So we respect that, and I'm sure you do too.
They should go out there and get it.
Exactly. Not sit in armchairs and hurl down thunderbolts.
Right. Exactly. I have no problem, and I understand why they have to verify everything down to the latest thing. But most of them will not go out there and prove it is a fake. They just because they haven't seen it before, and their professors have not mentioned it before, they just automatically say it's a fake.
Yeah. So what about Göbekli Tepe? What civilization was that part of? It's a place in Greece, by the way. Not Greece. I should say Turkey.
It's in Turkey.
Yeah.
Right.
And discovered a few years ago, and amazing art and things of this kind. So why don't you go ahead and talk about it, Arthur?
Well, they've only uncovered about 5 or 10% of it, and I went there. I went there by satellite, and I performed geoglyphical analysis on what they've uncovered, and it is a geoglyph. And I suspect, in fact, the part they've uncovered is a perfect outlines the border of Turkey, the very thing that it's in. But I suspect that when they get the whole thing uncovered, because it is a series of circles with pointers within the circles. It is a series of those, and I forgot how many there are, something like 21. I'm not sure if that's the right number or not, that they will uncover eventually. My guess is that will be the map to all these territories that I'm working on right now.
Okay.
That's my guess.
All right.
And the reason that I think they covered it up is because they wanted somebody to find it in the future and restore the world back to the way that they had it at that time. Which was
what?
Which was the golden age, when everybody got along and they had their own territories and didn't have wars encroaching on other people's territories.
That's funny. I was just going to say, one of the greatest creators of historical and archaeological evidence, and even anthropological evidence, is unfortunately our wars. And if you had a peaceful period, you wouldn't have as many indicators of it.
Well, we both know the biggest cause of wars is religion. And
well, I think it's bucks myself, money.
Well, gold had a lot to do with some wars too.
Yeah.
But it's been my experience that every war has an undercurrent of religion attached to it.
Yeah, I often think religion has nothing to do with God. I don't know. But in any case...
Well, religion is man-made, so you're right.
Yeah. I was wondering, why don't we... actually, I think we better... Why don't we take our break now?
All right, if you want to take it now.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to get in the middle of a question and have to take a break. We have a little more leeway than we do on CBS here. So we will take a break. You are listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley, not far from the Newport Tower. And we'll be right back with our fascinating guest, Arthur Faram. Just a minute, so stick with us.
Hi, everybody. This is Mark Garrow, the host of PRN's Garage Pass, where I keep you up to date with all the latest NASCAR racing news. Garage Pass can be heard right here on WOON every Tuesday through Saturday mornings at 7:35 and is sponsored by Simon Chevrolet, 114 Fortin Drive, Woonsocket. Remember, Simon Chevrolet is always open online at simonchevy.com. Garage Pass, Simon Chevrolet, and WOON Woonsocket Radio. A winning combination.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
And I wanted to just tell you about a few of the charities Ben and I have adopted recently. And one is, of course, USA Cares, a marvelous group that financially helps many of the U.S. active duty and veterans, families, and active duty personnel. They assist all branches of the service, all ranks and components, and it's essentially financial aid. If there's a problem paying the mortgage that month for the veteran or his or her family, out goes a check from these people. They're really, really great. So check that out at usacares.org. Also, Canadian Veterans Advocacy. Whether or not you are a Canadian listening, then remember that Canada's been with us in the War on Terror side by side for the whole bit, and many have lost loved ones in Canada, and there are many wounded veterans there as well. So, Canadian Veterans Advocacy. Our good friend Michael Blaze is the founder of that, veteran himself, and check that out at CanadianVeteransAdvocacy.org. And also Builders Helping Heroes right here locally in Rhode Island Builders Association charity, building a home for a wounded veteran now for free for him and his family. He hasn't got a family yet, but just his wife. They plan to start a family up in Burrillville, Rhode Island. And check that out too, BuildersHelpingHeroes.org. Great charities. Okay, so let's come back to our very interesting guest here and our very interesting subject. Arthur, I want to give you a chance before we burn up this hour to talk about your books, where people can get them, website, etc., and what else, wherever else you might want to say you're working on.
Okay, my first book, called Ancient Signposts, was to familiarize people with the new science. Well, actually, it's not new; it's an ancient science. I just happened to rediscover it. The first book, Ancient Signposts, consisted mostly of explaining the science and giving many examples all over the world of how it was used. My second book goes into the history that is exposed by these geoglyphs, and it covers all the way from 43 BC in Galatia, which used to be the capital of the Celts, when they were pushed up against the west coast of Europe, all the way back up until the Revolutionary War, and it explains how the Vikings got started, what happened to the Vikings, how people over here were colonizing in the 1200s already in the United States, Europeans, and how the Sinclairs. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Henry Sinclair.
I've heard of it. Yeah, I wanted to get into your family connections as well.
Okay. Well, Henry Sinclair was the royal family of the Celts, and there's three classes of Celts. There's the royals, the troops, and the freemen, and Henry Sinclair was the royalty of the Celts, and in 1398 he's supposed to have left for America, and to hide the history that is behind what the Sinclairs and the other people attached to that family did, they just said he just disappeared. Well, in my book, you'll find that I found the colony and the geoglyphs that prove that he made it to the United States and lived here in Baltimore, Maryland for I don't know how long, but it's clear that he lived here. And like most of my book, there is photographic evidence and the geoglyphic science to back it up. I try not to do or say anything that I can't prove.
Yeah, no, that's always a good thing. Let's just for a minute come back to Rhode Island here. And now, were I to go back, or Ben or somebody, 10,000 years ago, or let's say 20,000 years ago, what would we find in Newport?
Well, 20,000 years ago, I couldn't say.
Okay.
But probably right after the Ice Age, you would see the people coming from Europe.
Yeah, the Ice Age is about 12,000 years ago, roughly.
Right.
Yeah.
You would probably find the people of Europe coming back to Newport, and strangely enough, one of these territories that I was telling you about at the beginning of the show exists in North America. And there's a place in Minnesota called Inspiration Peak. You probably never heard of it.
No. I don't know, there weren't any peaks in Minnesota. Oh, well, there are. But.
Well, you wouldn't think so. It's not very high. It's only about 1,600 feet high. It's not a big...
That's twice as high as the highest point in Rhode Island, but go ahead.
But it is the highest peak in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And strangely enough, this peak is a survey marker for the entire North American continent. It's 3,080 miles from the equator. It's 3,080 miles from the North Pole. 1,362 miles from the northwest corner of the United States, and it's 1,362 miles from the northeast corner of the United States, and it's 1,362 miles down to Texas. And this is too much of... this could not be a coincidence. And the Newport Tower, which I'm sure you're interested in, plays a big part in identifying this ancient survey marker. And based upon its size, because these areas were split up later on after the Ice Age, based upon its size and the size that I found in the Bosnian pyramid, I would suspect that this marker was surveyed about the same time that the Bosnian pyramid was, because it took up Europe and Africa, and that's a larger area than most of these geoglyphs take up later on. And the Newport Tower was built to identify this survey marker. This Newport Tower is orientated on a 09273 orientation, and the 273 radial goes directly through Inspiration Peak. So that is the reason that the tower was built. Now, there's some geometry that goes into finding Inspiration Peak, because you cannot see Inspiration Peak even from a satellite just by going along the 273 line and finding out where it ends. So there is some geometry involved in the Newport Tower to find Inspiration Peak and point to it. And there's a triangle that develops, if you know how to develop the geometry, that the vertex of the triangle winds up right exactly on top of Inspiration Peak. Well, there was some, I don't want to say wars, but let's say skirmishes between the Norse, who were trying to enter the United States, and the Celts, and did not want them in the United States. Some skirmishes that revolved around Inspiration Peak, because both of them knew that that was a sacred spot. And so the Celts moved 22 miles south and inscribed the Kensington runestone, which gave all the geometry that you needed to describe what would be the territory of the North America, what eventually became the United States. And if you do the same geometry that you do to find Inspiration Peak, 1 degree to the left of the geometry to find Inspiration Peak, the vertex winds up directly over where the Kensington runestone was found. And on the Kensington runestone is all the information you need to work out the boundaries of what we now know as the United States, with some modifications that have happened over time. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to point out that the Kensington runestone, found in Minnesota, when was it found, Arthur? I don't quite remember. Early 20th century, by a farmer.
It was found about 1899, I believe, something like that.
Okay. As these things go, it is taken relatively seriously by many mainstream archaeologists, I should say, and it has runes carved on it, and perhaps you could say more about, and you're describing what these are, so go ahead.
Well, the runes in particular are runes that the Celts used in the area of Norway and Denmark.
Yeah, it's ancient writing.
It's ancient writing, and it is specific to that territory. And the geometry that I was speaking about at Newport Tower supports the fact that both the Kensington Runestone and Inspiration Peak are legitimate. You know, you've had people ever since the thing was found saying that this proves that the writing's not correct, and this proves that the writing's a fake, and this and that and other thing. But mathematics is very hard to argue with.
Yeah. Well, let me point out another a local connection here. Excuse me. A local connection here in Rhode Island. In the beginning of my book, Rhode Island: A Genial History, I start with the period that I suppose Arthur's talking about in a way, last ice age up to the current, so-called modern history. And there is there are the inscribed rocks of the Narragansett Bay Basin, a number of which are very interesting.
Well, you just had the Narragansett runestone stolen, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. It's been stolen several times. They always get it back. But,
is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That, along with a couple of other things around here, such as the state's dignity lately. Anyway, there were samples of coal found near what we call the Arnold Point Cupstone, which is another interesting story. And the coal, I beg your pardon, and the coal, there was a coal mine there at one point. And coal that was identified as coming from that mine has been found in Viking settlements in Greenland.
Exactly, like I said before.
And this is an archaeological fact that's accepted.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is something to all this. So, I'm sorry. So go ahead.
Well, if these archaeologists that we were talking about would just do carbon dating and chemical analysis on these things, they would come to the same conclusions that you and I have come to. But I have not found one mainstream archaeologist or chemist yet that will get involved with this stuff. They just all sit back and either ignore it or say it's a fake. So I don't know what to say. You can't say bad things about science because it's necessary. It's a necessary system. But the way people conduct themselves, that just leaves you to wonder.
Well, again, it's human nature, I suppose. You've got academic reputations at stake and all sorts of things of that.
Well, I don't know how you can tarnish your reputation by trying to prove something's a fake.
Well, you'd think so. Well, usually when people are our age and about, they don't care as much, I suppose.
Exactly. Once you get older, you don't have anything to worry about.
Exactly. That's a good thing about getting old. So now I'm interested in your family connections with some of this information. Much of the information that is passed down in families is very interesting. In our family, we had my grandfather had a son had the same name, a very unique name of an ancestor from the 1400s, and how he even knew about that ancestor is bizarre. Never mind naming people after. So things get passed down in families. What's the story about your family and all this information?
Well, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me about that because it is so historical that even I find it hard to believe. I've traced my family tree back to Galicia, which is with Portugal, is the oldest Celtic, in fact, the oldest countries in Europe. The boundary line between Portugal and Galicia, which is just north of Portugal, is the oldest boundary in Europe. And I've traced my heritage back to Galicia in a Celtic community called Coronia, Galicia. And during the period of the Muslim invasion of Europe, which happened in 400 A.D., all the Galatians, not all of them, but the majority of the Galatians moved to Denmark. Well, my particular family moved to Zeeland, Denmark, which is about 20 miles north of Copenhagen. And their task in the Denmark government was to collect taxes on ships passing through Orsund Sound, which is only 4 miles wide, leading into the Baltic Sea. And so from 400 A.D. until 1498 A.D., that was their purpose. Later on, when the Templars came into effect, the Templars set up a training ground. In fact, Bernard de Clairvaux.
Bernard of Clairvaux, yeah.
Yeah, Bernard de Clairvaux, who started the Templars in France, opened a monastery just north of Faram, Denmark, and trained the Templars there before they went into the field.
Yeah, the Templars, not to interrupt you, just in case anybody doesn't know who the Templars are, this was an order of knights. This is rather interesting and rather exotic.
Right, it's a whole nother story.
Right.
In fact, most people think that when the Templars were disbanded by the Catholic Church and run out of Europe, that was the end of them, but it wasn't. They turned around and Portugal asked them to come in and help rid the Iberian Peninsula of the Moors. Well, the Galatians were Templars, and they were more than happy to help them. Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, the Portuguese, who had already established ownership of North and South America, deeded the portion that is now the United States to the Templars for helping them rid the Iberian Peninsula of the Moors. And there's a big piece of history that most people don't know that's in my book.
Yeah.
And also the true reason Columbus came to the Americas.
It's funny. I was just going to ask you about that because I wanted to cover that as well. You say Columbus had a different mission than just finding gold and gospel.
How much time do we have left?
15 minutes.
Oh,
actually, a little less than that.
Okay, well, I've got time to tell you the story then.
Okay.
Columbus, in the early 1400s, went to England, he went to Portugal, he went to Spain, he went to Italy, trying to find funding to find a route to the Spice Islands, which were very lucrative as far as selling spice to Europeans. And he could not find any funding. Well, after a few years, he went back to the King and Queen of Spain and asked them once more for funding. And the King and Queen's cabinet told them that Columbus had miscalculated the distance to the Spice Islands from Spain and not to do it. Well, by then Portugal was working with Spain and had already told them that the Americas existed and that the Templars were in North America and the Portuguese owned all of Brazil. And they did not want, both the Portuguese and Spain did not want Columbus to finally get funding and come over and find out that both North and South America were already colonized. So if you can believe this, they gave Columbus a piece of paper that said, you can live off the land in Spain until the war is over and we get all the Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula. And that meant that he could go into any restaurant, any tavern, any bed and breakfast or whatever there was there, and with that order, they had to give it to him for free. Well, this lasted for 6 years before the war was over. So here Columbus had this freedom for 6 years before the war was over. Well, the war was over in, I think it was April of 1492. Of course, I'm sure 1492 rings a bell.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in September of 1492, Columbus got the funding from Spain to take 3 ships and come to America. Well, Columbus was on one ship, which was owned by a Galatian, and the Pizon brothers, which were Muslims that already knew about the Americas and lived on the south coast of Spain. Well, these Muslims should have been run out of Spain, but they weren't. There was some association with the King and Queen of Spain, or they had something on these 2 brothers. But the brothers knew about the Americas. So they put one brother on one ship, on the Nina. They put the other on the other ship, the Pinta, and they put Columbus and Juan de la Cosa on the Santa Maria. And they started their trip to the Americas, and Columbus was the only one of those four that thought that they were going to try and find a way to the Spice Islands. The other three were in collusion to keep Columbus from finding out that North and South America were colonized.
Why didn't they want to know that? And what evidence do you have that that was the case?
Well, Columbus placed geoglyphs when he got here, and I know where they are. And these geoglyphs show that Spain claimed the land between the United States, what is now the United States, and the land that is now Portugal, which is South America. And that was Spain's motive to send them here, was to claim Central America for themselves. And the Pinzon brothers' reason for coming here was for gold, because they knew there was gold in Veracruz. And the book explains how this all came about and the steps that were taken to do it. But Columbus, even years after he got back to Spain, still thought that he had found the Spice Islands because he was in the Caribbean, and there's islands all over the place. And specifically, when they arrived in the Caribbean, the first place that they stopped was the exact corner of the Templar, the territory that the Portuguese had given to the Templars, and they put a geoglyph there also. But it's all spelled out, and these geoglyphs show the territory that the Spanish claimed. And like I said, it's hard to argue with pictures and mathematics.
Yeah, well, I should point out also that, most school children are taught that everybody thought the world was flat before Columbus proved that. I mean, that's not true at all. Any educated person knew that the world was round.
Oh, yeah.
Well, everybody knew that the world wasn't flat, but the reason they were telling everybody that the informed people, the royalty, knew that it wasn't flat because they were coming over here to the Americas all the time.
I think my ancestors thought it was banana-shaped.
Well, if everyone knew about it, they'd come over here and start taking the riches that the royalty was enjoying already from coming over here. So,
well, that makes sense.
And there are many political and religious reasons why history was distorted the way it is, and I cannot blame the United States for distorting it, because there's other people that entered into it. The United States had reasons for people to believe as they did, and lied by omission, as far as I'm concerned. So if you read the book, it's all spelled out there, and I think it'll become pretty clear.
Yeah, I'll be able to ask more intelligent questions next time having read the book. So this is all pretty much about greed. That's very easy to believe.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, now I'm sure the mound builders come into this at some point. They're considered Native Americans, but they're in the central part of the country, pretty much all the way down the center of the country. They built these animal-shaped mounds. And
have you ever heard of Monk's Mound?
Yes.
Just across from St. Louis?
Yeah.
That is a geoglyph that was made by the Celts, or the people that were here at the time. And I don't want to say their name because I don't want to start a row over the radio. You can read the book to find out who they were. But that geoglyph was built because the Norse were trying to block the United States passage to the West Coast. And all the relics that have been found of Norse geoglyphs have been found from Minnesota to Louisiana on the west side of the Mississippi. So the North were trying to block the passage of the United States to the West Coast. But what they didn't know is that the Portuguese had already given them the whole thing.
Now, people are going to say, okay, first of all, these are tremendous feats of engineering, carried on what is essentially a Bronze Age culture and without air travel. What say you?
You're exactly right. And all I can tell you is that from time immemorial, man has been studying the stars and traveling the Earth. And if you had a good model or good maps of the Earth and you knew the stars, you could draw these lines pretty accurately. Now, a lot of other people would like to say that UFOs helped them do it, but I found no evidence of that. Man, you said it at the very beginning, we have gone through many civilizations that were advanced or maybe even more advanced than we are. So it's not inconceivable that these generations before us passed down this knowledge to these generations we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's just plain logic.
Yeah, our ancestors weren't stupid. If anything, they're smarter than we are now.
Yeah,
exactly.
Probably, yeah. And, we don't sort of gauge advancement
as in technological advancement.
Yeah, it should be sort of moral and spiritual advancement.
We're very vain in the way we look at ourselves.
Oh, we sure are.
Indeed we are.
And we are proving now that we have the technology. We're proving on a daily basis that we keep pushing civilization back and back and back, further and further and further.
Yep.
Only 20, 30, 40 years ago, people would say that man was created 5,000 years ago. Now we've got proof of mankind that had a very high intelligence, much longer than that.
Oh, yes. Is any of this knowledge being used today, other than by researchers? I mean, is it there's the cultural knowledge come out? Have any documents come down from these civilizations? Is it traditions, things of this kind? I'm sure that we are not isolated from our ancestors in that sense. Are there any? Are governments aware of this? Is it still being used for the purposes of greed?
Every government that has ever existed since 24,000 BC has known about this, the officials of the government, and they have kept it from the common people.
Why?
Including ours.
Yeah, why, though? Why bother? I mean, there's a bigger fish to fry.
Well, these geoglyphs are so hard to find if you're on the ground. I've been out to try and find some of them. Of course, I found them because I knew they were there, but they're very difficult to locate because the lines and so forth are so far apart that if you saw one, you'd just think it's maybe a trench or something like that. And I think they built them that large so that the only people that would know about them was themselves, and if someone else contested their ownership, they could come out and show them that they had already conquered that land.
All right, well, I'd like to pursue that, but we're just pretty much out of time.
Yeah.
Arthur Faram, thank you so very much. And certainly local people, thenewporttower.com, check it out. And Arthur, we'll have you back sometime, and it's really been interesting. Thank you so much.
All right. Call me back when you read the book.
I will do that.
Okay.
Very good.
Have a good
care.
one. Bye.
Okay. So, many thanks to our producer, Ben himself. And next week, August 12th, Ben and I will bring you an open line show on many paranormal topics. Send your questions or comments now to Paul at behindtheparanormal.com or Ben at behindtheparanormal.com. Or use the question form at the show site, behindtheparanormal.com, which we should point out has been having a few issues. We've been unable to upload because of what they described as a blunt force cyber attack. Funny, after we had Stan Friedman on last.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. So in any case, we are working on that, and just stay. You can get the podcasts at iTunes for the CBS show on Sunday nights, or at onworldwide.com for these Monday shows until we get that straightened out and get them uploaded.
All right, so on our CBS edition of the show on Sunday, August 11th in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, / Windsor, and Seattle and Vancouver, and on radio.com, we will welcome our friend Kathleen Marden for a discussion of what she has uncovered about alien abduction.
And we leave you this evening with a thought from American journalist Sidney J. Harris. When I hear somebody sigh, life is hard, I'm always tempted to compare. I should say, I ruined it. I'm always tempted to ask, compared to what? Unquote.
All right, so thanks for joining us on a great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.